When we trace the roots of modern Europe, we inevitably find ourselves in the court of a king who would become an emperor, a warrior whose conquests reshaped the map of the West, a ruler whose vision would lay the foundations for what we now call Europe. His name was Charlemagne, Charles the Great, a man whose ambition and faith forged an empire from the ashes of Rome, and whose legacy still echoes through our cathedrals, our universities, and our very idea of what it means to be European. Charlemagne was born on April 2nd, 747, though the exact date is still debated, to Pepin the Short, the first king of the Franks from the Carolingian dynasty, and Bertrada of Laon. At his birth, Europe was a fractured landscape of warring tribes, fading Roman memories, and scattered Christian kingdoms clinging to survival. The Western Roman Empire had fallen nearly 3 centuries earlier, leaving behind chaos and competing warlords. From his earliest years, Charlemagne was immersed in this turbulent world of shifting alliances, tribal feuds, and the growing influence of the Christian Church. His father, Pepin, had risen to power by deposing the last of the Merovingian puppet kings with the blessing of the Pope, establishing the Carolingian line that would forever change Europe's destiny. When Pepin died in 768, the Frankish realm was divided between Charlemagne and his younger brother, Carloman, a division that threatened to fracture their power at a time when unity was desperately needed. The relationship between the brothers was tense and fragile, each ruling from separate courts. But fortune favored Charlemagne. In 771, Carloman died suddenly, leaving Charlemagne the sole ruler of the Franks at the age of 24. With the entire Frankish kingdom under his command, Charlemagne turned his gaze outward, seeking to expand his dominion and spread his faith. Charlemagne's reign would be defined by relentless warfare and an unyielding belief in the Christianization of Europe. His campaigns against the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in the forests of Germany, the Avars in the east, and the Moors in Spain would come to shape a vast realm that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, from the North Sea to the Italian peninsula. In 773, when Pope Adrian I called for help against the Lombards who threatened Rome, Charlemagne answered swiftly. He crossed the Alps, a feat that would become legendary, and laid siege to Pavia, the Lombard capital. Within a year, Charlemagne had defeated the Lombard king Desiderius and assumed the title of King of the Lombards himself, the first time a Frankish king had worn the Iron Crown of Lombardy. In doing so, he cemented the alliance between the Frankish monarchy and the papacy, an alliance that would culminate in his imperial coronation decades later. But of all his campaigns, it was the protracted war against the pagan Saxons that would test Charlemagne's resolve like no other. The Saxons, fiercely independent and devoted to their ancient gods, resisted conversion and conquest for over 30 years. Charlemagne's wars against them were brutal, marked by forced baptisms, the destruction of sacred groves, and harsh reprisals against rebellion. The most infamous episode came in 782 with the massacre of Verdun, where Charlemagne ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon captives who had broken their oaths of loyalty. It was an act that would stain his legacy with the blood of religious zealotry, but also highlight the absolute commitment he had to unifying his empire under the cross. Despite his ruthlessness on the battlefield, Charlemagne's rule was not one of brute force alone. He understood that to govern such a vast and diverse territory, he needed more than armies. He needed administration, education, and faith to bind his people together. His court at Aachen, in modern-day Germany, became the shining center of what historians would later call the Carolingian Renaissance. Here, Charlemagne gathered scholars from across Europe, men like Alcuin of York, Paul the Deacon, and Einhard, his faithful biographer, to revive learning and preserve classical knowledge. Latin was standardized, ancient manuscripts copied and illuminated, and schools were established within monasteries and cathedrals. In an age when literacy was a privilege of the few, Charlemagne sought to spread it among the clergy and the nobility alike, ensuring that the flame of knowledge would not be extinguished in the darkness of the early medieval world. Aachen itself became more than just a capital. It was Charlemagne's answer to Rome. Inspired by the grandeur of the ancient empire, he built the magnificent Palatine Chapel, crowned with a domed octagonal church, blending Roman, Byzantine, and Germanic influences. It still stands today, a testament to his dream of resurrecting the spirit of Rome in the heart of Europe. Charlemagne's relationship with the papacy reached its zenith on Christmas Day, 800 AD. On that day, in the hallowed halls of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans. It was a symbolic act that revived the title of Roman Emperor in the West, 3 centuries after its fall. For Charlemagne, it was both a divine blessing and a political maneuver, elevating his status above rival kings and forging a new idea of Christendom, a realm where church and state were bound together under one ruler. Yet, this coronation would also sow seeds of rivalry. In the East, the Byzantines in Constantinople saw themselves as the true heirs of Rome. Charlemagne's new title challenged their claim, creating a tension between East and West that would ripple through medieval politics and culminate centuries later in the Great Schism between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Charlemagne ruled his empire not only with the sword, but through an evolving system of governance. He dispatched missi dominici, royal agents who traveled the realm to inspect local counts, settle disputes, and ensure his laws were enforced. His capitularies, royal decrees, addressed everything from church reform to the protection of widows and orphans. Though primitive by modern standards, this administrative network laid the groundwork for centralized governance in medieval Europe. In his personal life, Charlemagne was equally formidable. Towering and broad-shouldered, he was described by Einhard as energetic, physically robust, and fond of outdoor pursuits like hunting and riding. He was married at least 4 times and had numerous concubines, fathering over a dozen children. Charlemagne was deeply devoted to his family, especially his daughters, whom he kept close at court, refusing to marry them off for fear of political intrigue. Despite his power, Charlemagne was not without challenges. His vast empire was a patchwork of diverse peoples and customs, constantly at risk of fracturing along tribal and regional lines. His rule depended on the loyalty of local nobles, whose ambitions could easily threaten unity. He also faced external threats from the Vikings in the north and the expanding Islamic Caliphate in Spain. Charlemagne's twilight years were marked by a deepening piety. He took a keen interest in church reform, sought to improve the moral standards of the clergy, and demanded that bishops uphold the highest ideals of Christian life. He spent much time at his court in Aachen, surrounded by scholars and his large family, contemplating how to secure his realm for future generations. In 814, at the age of 66, Charlemagne died in Aachen. He was buried in his beloved Palatine Chapel, beneath the great dome he had built as a symbol of his vision. His tomb became a place of pilgrimage, and in the centuries that followed, he would be venerated as a saint and hero of Christendom. Yet, for all his achievements, Charlemagne's empire did not endure as he might have hoped. His son and successor, Louis the Pious, struggled to hold the realm together. After Louis's death, Charlemagne's grandsons divided the empire through the Treaty of Verdun in 843, fracturing it into 3 parts that would eventually evolve into the modern nations of France, Germany, and Italy. This division reflected the age-old challenges of ruling such a vast, diverse territory and the persistent pull of regional identities. Despite the political fragmentation, Charlemagne's legacy was profound. He had forged an idea of Europe as a cultural and spiritual unity under the Christian faith. He had rekindled learning, preserved ancient knowledge, and laid the foundations for medieval universities. His model of kingship, both warrior and guardian of the church, would inspire countless rulers after him. For centuries, emperors of the Holy Roman Empire would invoke Charlemagne's name to legitimize their reigns. Napoleon, in his imperial ambitions, looked to Charlemagne as a model of glory. Even Adolf Hitler, in a dark distortion of history, tried to claim the Carolingian heritage for his vision of a united Europe under Germanic dominance. Today, Charlemagne's influence is felt not through conquest, but through ideals. The European Union honors him with the Charlemagne Prize, awarded annually in Aachen to individuals who contribute to European unity. His legacy reminds us that the concept of Europe as a shared community is not new. It was forged in part by a king whose reach extended beyond borders, tribes, and tongues. Of course, Charlemagne was not without flaws. His reign was marked by episodes of brutality, forced conversions, massacres, and the suppression of cultural identities. His vision of unity often came at the expense of those who resisted his rule. Yet these shadows are part of the complex legacy of a man who embodied both the light and darkness of medieval power. In the great cathedral of European history, Charlemagne stands as a towering figure, the bridge between ancient Rome and medieval Christendom. between tribal Europe and the idea of a shared Western civilization. His life reminds us that history is never simple, that empires rise and fall, but ideas, when kindled by vision and faith, can endure for centuries. We see his legacy in every crowned monarch who claims descent from his line, in the cathedrals that rise from the plains of France and Germany, in the Latin texts preserved by monks who answered his call for learning. We see it in the legal codes, the traditions of governance, the very notion that Europe can be more than a patchwork of rival kingdoms, that it can be a community bound by shared heritage and belief. Charlemagne's reign closed a chapter of darkness left by Rome's fall and opened a new one, imperfect, incomplete, yet vital for what would come after. He did not live to see his empire endure, but his dream of unity echoes whenever we speak of Europe not just as a continent, but as an idea. 13 centuries after his birth, the father of Europe remains just that, a father figure in stone and parchment, legend and memory. His life, both inspiring and cautionary, reminds us that history is written by men who dared to dream and fight for something greater than themselves. In the end, Charlemagne was not merely a king of the Franks or emperor of the Romans. He was a maker of Europe. And long after swords have rusted and crowns have turned to dust, the dream of unity he forged, however flawed, continues to challenge and inspire us today.